All right, daily devotion time again. Welcome back. We're doing part 3 of our craziness series on the craziness of the upside down world of stupidity, actually, that is going on. I mean, we live in a world that is literally crazy. They are saying to their children that you were born a boy, but you can choose to be a girl. That's crazy. They're saying, if you get pregnant with a boy and you wanted a girl, just hang in there. You can have a doctor change them. They're saying if you have a child, you can take it all the way to the delivery room table and decide with the baby laying in a bed next to you whether or not you want to go ahead and take its life. These are the things that are literally insane. And that's what's going on in this world. And that tells us that God has abandoned this generation as he prepares to bring in and usher in the events of Revelation chapter 4, between 4 and 19, or 18, I should say, through 18, because this is what's getting ready to come up on the face of the earth. But the church of Jesus Christ is going to be taken out of here. We're going to be caught up to meet the Lord in the air, and that which restrains is going to be taken out of the way, and then the evil one is going to be revealed, and a time of darkness is coming on the face of the earth like never before. It will be nearly impossible to do any evangelization during that time, though God will be doing a great revival of salvation during that time. It will be the seed sown in the church age that will bring about this revival, because many people will have been left behind and will realize the truth, will turn to their Bibles, and they will realize that they better not get involved in the Antichrist system and receive the mark of the beast, which will be mandatory upon all the world. So we're talking about the craziness and where it comes from. It comes from God abandoning the generation that is the last generation before the second coming of Christ, which is not to be confused with the rapture. The second coming of Christ is when Christ comes with his church to take and establish the kingdom of God into this world and to abolish the rule of man completely. So we're in part 3. Let's get to some more video clips that we've been looking at. We've been observing Susan Blackmore, I believe, yes, Blackmore, and Jordan Peterson in a discussion hosted by Justin, who is with Premier Christian Network, and they are discussing the psychology of belief, Christian beliefs, and they are talking about, is it possible to find meaning without God? And here is a clip from Susan Blackmore, who is describing how she finds that it's possible, but it's very difficult to do without God. Let's take a look and see what she has to say.
I was brought up like you as a Christian, and I threw that out because in the end it didn't make sense to me. So that's another way to say I'm left with naturalism, but I'm not left with a naturalism that explains everything. I'm left with a feeling that that's what I want to try to do, to understand what's going on here in minds, in bodies, in tables and glasses of water, and it's very difficult.
Okay, so what's going on here in tables of glasses and of water? And you know, she is lost. She is lost. Here she is, a brilliant lady, a very sweet lady. She has a great demeanor, and she has a great attitude in discussing the things that she hates about Jordan Peterson, although she doesn't show it in hate, and I'll give that to her. She does a very nice job of keeping very pleasant, and she's very likable. But the bottom line is she has rejected Christ. And so in rejecting Christ, she is trying to find a way in the dark world of meaning. And so she's working diligently trying to establish her own source of meaning in a meaningless world. If you are an evolutionist, you have a world without meaning because it is merely material. And they really do not understand consciousness, and they don't understand the soul. And so therefore they pretend all they are is mechanical parts of mechanical tangible things, material things. And unfortunately for them, this is really difficult, as they admit to. Next, we're going to look at what she has to say in terms of Jordan Peterson's book, 12 Rules for Life. By the way, I highly recommend this book. I have it myself, and it is really good. If you want to learn how to live your life as if there is a God, see, this is my problem with Jordan Peterson. He will say it doesn't matter if you actually believe in God, as long as you live your life as if he exists, then you'll have the right outcome. And I understand that from a humanist point of view, but God did not give us the rules to live by in order for us to just have a pleasant life here. God wants to save us from our sinfulness, our sinful nature, and that cannot be overcome by good works. And so Jordan Peterson is very wrong about his Christian theology when it comes to belief in God, but he is so right about so many things that if you have salvation in place, then the rest of what he has to say makes a lot of sense, and it works. All right, so let's move on to this clip here with Susan.
I guess I'd be interested to know what your response, having had a chance to look at the book, is to this way of looking at life.
What's her reaction?
How we create meaning for ourselves in the process.
Is my reaction, if you like. It's so full of lovely stories, really interesting, thought-provoking stories. Wisdom, lots of wisdom all over the place. Then the Bible stories. Then this...
You just don't understand that? You don't get why the Bible is being invoked?
I get it in this sense, that those stories, many of them, are very deep and have something to tell us. But it's the way I think that Jordan kind of slithers from a good idea about this might be a good way to live your life.
Notice the word slither. Jordan slithers. He's a snake, and he has deviously inserted into his book this horrible Bible stuff that I can't stand. See, good is bad. Evil is good. And she hates God so much that she wants nothing to do with his word. So therefore, you know, the problem with Jordan's book.
To this story. I mean, let me give you an example. You talk about, with great knowledge, about the evolutionary arms race between the size of babies' heads and the size of women's pelvises. And this is something that's always fascinated me. I think it's meme-driven that, you know, we've ended up with childbirth being painful, as I well know, and you probably don't, how painful it is, for those reasons. But then later in the book, you bring in the story of Adam and Eve and how God says, you know, women will suffer and, you know, and so on. And the implication, not clearly stated, but the implication to the reader is God did it. Now, on the one hand, you're saying, look, we evolved this way. This pain and suffering is an inevitable consequence of the way that evolution has played out. And in the other, you're kind of luring people into believing that God actually made that. And even worse than that, the idea that it at least speaks to me, that somehow we're so bad and deserve all that suffering, which in other places in the book you try and get rid of, that we shouldn't feel so wicked and bad.
So this is the inevitable place that atheists go, and that is they can't accept the world as it is unless nothing made it. They accept that world gladly if nothing made it. But if God made it, what they have a problem with is how it is made. In other words, it cannot possibly be done on purpose this way. And they fail to understand the suffering that brings about the change that brings us from a meaningless existence to a place of significance and meaningfulness through suffering. Yes, God did make childbirth painful. It says so in Genesis in chapter 3, I believe, and it makes it very clear that it is God's design. The world is going to be a suffering existence. It is tragic, and it does resemble the cross. And the cross is God's plan for humanity so that they can receive the experiences necessary to appreciate heaven when they get there, and to have a full on understanding of the cost for their salvation. Of course, I'm just hitting some parts of the reason they're suffering. But nevertheless, as you can see, the rejection of God is based upon the reality of what is. The reality is, it is a suffering world we're in, and there's no way they're going to worship a God who would force upon them that kind of suffering on purpose. That is evil to them, and therefore a world without a God is better than a world with a God. It's just crazy. Now, let's take another time here for another clip to see Susan's idea of gratitude. It's really funny. Free floating gratitude. Have you ever heard of that? You're getting ready to.
You have this issue with rationalism and the Enlightenment and so on, where you feel that those who appeal to that as somehow we're in this golden age now are forgetting that it's all built on a much deeper, longer evolutionary psychological history, which is completely different to rationalism per se.
Yeah, well, I see a university professor. Let's take Dawkins, for example. He's the sovereign, rational individual, but there's a wall around him. That's the wall, let's say, of his university. And then outside the university, there's the wall of the town. And outside the town, there's the wall of the state and the wall of the country. And there's just these concentric rings that are protecting him. And he can stand in the middle and say, well, I'm divorced from all that. It doesn't undergird me. It's like it undergirds you to a degree that you can't possibly imagine. And you're living on the, well, really it is the resources that have been gathered painfully and bloodily in the past, and saying, well, we can just detach ourselves from that and float off. It's like, no, you can't. You don't understand what you're talking about.
All that leads me to gratitude for all that we have. I mean, I recognize that. I recognize that nothing to do with any religious basis at all. I recognize that I could not come on the train here, have a really interesting discussion, meet Justin again, have a nice glass of cool water, without a load of other people doing it for me. That gratitude, which is one of the things that you quite rightly put into your book, it gives good place to it, and it's very important. That doesn't come from anything religious, unless you say because I was brought up a Christian it came from there, but I don't base it on that anymore.
What do you think it comes from?
I think it comes from a recognition that I've done a lot of meditation. I've meditated every day for 30 years, and I think this has something to do with it. But it's observing the inner consequences of different ways of confronting the world. And I'm much more in recent years in the habit of waking up in the morning, even if it's raining in January in England, and looking out and going, oh, yeah, and it's a feeling of gratitude, not gratitude towards God or towards anybody or anything, just free-floating gratitude. That seems to have a positive consequence. I set the day up better, and it's kind of self-perpetuating. It pops up again and again.
Do you think you can just have gratitude in general, or must gratitude always be given towards something and ultimately God?
That's a good question. That goes back to our discussion about acting things out. Like, gratitude is something you feel towards something. And you can say, well, I don't feel it towards anything in particular. And I would say, all right, well, the diffuse nothing that you feel it towards serves in your psychological hierarchy as your equivalent of God.
No, but it's gratitude. This morning, for example, I looked out and it was so green. We've had frosts and it's been white the last few days, and it was green this morning, and it was just gratitude to the universe, if you like. It's not really God, because it's not a creator. It's not anything I can pray to. I know.
Why feel gratitude towards it then?
I don't know, but I find
That's fine.
I don't know. She is struggling so hard to ignore the elephant in the room. You all know about that, right? There is this colloquial saying, the elephant in the room, ignoring the elephant in the room. Here's the idea. If there were an elephant in a room, it would be so large, you would really look ridiculous ignoring it, because trying to pretend there's not an elephant in the room is impossible. And this is exactly what you're seeing Susan Blackmore do. You're seeing her deny God and refused to acknowledge the elephant. Sorry, God, I don't mean to equate you with an elephant, but it is a great example because there's nothing bigger than an elephant and there's nothing bigger than God. And Susan Blackmore is ignoring the elephant in the room. God is there. She gets up in the morning. She needs to have gratitude. And so therefore she pulls it out of herself, but she's not going to pray to God. She's not going to she's not going to acknowledge God. Why? To acknowledge God is to accept that the way things are, he made them. And they cannot accept that because of two things. One is it makes no sense to them that he would make a world with suffering in it and evil. And number two, then they would have to answer to God for what they do, and they would have to admit that they were sinful and they need God. And as you saw in her response, there is no possible way she thinks she is anything but good, and there's nothing bad in her. And that's the delusion of all of these folks. Hey, thanks for watching. We're going to do part 4 tomorrow. I'm having competition with Lobo in the background. So I'll talk to you next time. God bless.